Okay, welcome back to Sanhedrin. Last time out, we managed to do 3 words. Actually, it's not true. We actually did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We did 10 words. I'll just put it on the screen. It's on page 20, 20B, and it's on page 118 of the Steinsaltz. So you should be able to see the screen now.
Yes.
Right, so there we go. And so we said this, Umotzi la milchemet hareshut al pi bet din shel shivim ve'echad. This was a reprise of the first Mishnah on page 2a, where we said that going out to a milchemet reshut, a war, a permission war, a non-obligatory war, was needed to have the permission of the great Sanhedrin. Now, I hesitated a bit there because that's not actually quite true, according to some opinions, but we'll come back to that maybe in a few weeks' time. What we started to do last time out was to discuss what is the difference between a milchemet reshut, we'll call it an optional war, because that's what Rabbi Steinsaltz calls it, and that's quite a good name, and a milchemet mitzvah, a war which is a mitzvah. And we started to discuss that 2 weeks ago, and we're going to continue on that discussion today, because there are various different opinions, and of course there are halachic implications for today. And let's get straight to it, and go to the halachot of warfare, because the Torah tells us very clearly that there are halachot of warfare, and we have to know what we're talking about here. So let's go first of all to chapter 20 of Dvarim in Parashat Shoftim, and this is where we learn various halachot of war. Which type of war? Well, that's what we're going to discuss in a minute. But before we decide which kind of war this is talking about, let's have a look and see what the Torah says about warfare. Some of this will be familiar to you, and some of it you'll have forgotten, and you'll be interested to hear because you'll have not remembered it. So, Jeffrey isn't here, so I'll do the reading. When you go out to war against your enemies and you see horse and chariot, okay, let's just stop there. Sus v'rechev, horse and chariot. In modern day parlance, what's that talking about?
A tank.
Tanks, yeah, military hardware, basically. Military hardware. So when you go out against your enemies and you see all this military hardware, are people more numerous than you? That's usually the case when we fight our enemies. We are normally in the minority. You shall not be afraid of them. Why not? For Hashem your God is with you, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Now, that's the first thing. First of all, we are enjoined not to be afraid because God is with us. Now, let's stop there. If this is a milchemet mitzvah, a war which we are commanded to do, the word mitzvah obviously means a commandment. If this is a war that we are commanded to do, by whom are we commanded?
By God.
By God. And therefore,
by circumstance.
Well, we are commanded by God. That's why it's called a mitzvah. So if we are commanded by God, then it stands to reason, does it not, that God will be with us because we're doing his mitzvah. I mean, that's obvious, surely. So the question then would be, well, why do we need to be told that? We don't usually get told the blindingly obvious like that. So the question is, does this first pasuk, when you go out to war against your enemies, don't be afraid because God is with you, does that only apply to a milchemet mitzvah, or does it also apply to an optional war? Because you could argue that, well, nobody told you to go out to war. If you'd have gone out to war when I told you to do, which is a milchemet mitzvah, that I understand. I'm going to be with you. But why should I be with you, says God, if it's an optional war? What do you think, guys?
I think that it's not necessarily so that God will be with us in a milchemet mitzvah either, because there's a reason why. Because when Moshe was standing on the hill and we were fighting Amalek, which was a milchemet mitzvah, when he lowered his hands, Amalek managed to overcome Israel. And it was only when his hands were high that Israel managed to overcome Amalek. And that's why he had Joshua and Hur hold his hands up.
Aaron and Hur, actually, but yes.
Aaron and Hur, sorry. My mistake.
Okay, that's a fair comment. That's a fair comment. That because you're right about the war with Amalek. According to every opinion, the war with Amalek is a milchemet mitzvah because we have the end of Parshat Kiteitzei, Parshat Zachor, which we read a couple of weeks ago, which very clearly says you have to get rid of Amalek. So yes, that's a milchemet mitzvah. And so what Hannah is saying is that maybe God won't be with us. It's not entirely taken for granted. We actually have to do some stuff ourselves by fighting, because Joshua had to go out and fight against the Amalek people. They weren't just sort of handed over on a plate. And secondly, what Hannah is saying is that we also had to do some spiritual work. The idea of Moshe lifting up his hands was so that the people would recognize that God was on their side, as it were.
Also, he's beseeching God. You know what I mean? He's got his hands up.
Yeah,
please.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So
in the Tehillim this morning, I noticed, Johnny, between Ashrei and Uvolat Sion, it says Eila Barecha ve'Eila Basusim.
Yeah,
and God will save us. The same words.
And in fact, if you look at those, Eila Barecha ve'Eila Basusim, these, meaning the Goyim that were fighting, they believe, they put their trust in military hardware.
Yeah.
And what's the next words after that?
We trust in God.
Ba'anachnu, we got it there in front of you.
Ba'anachnu b'shem ad Hashem Elokeinu nazkir.
Right. We mention nazkir, means to mention. We mention the name of Hashem.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I think that's right. I think all of those things are right.
And Karuv and Nafolu, and they will fall.
They will fall, and we won't. And we won't, because we have God with us, and we have God with us, according to Hannah, only if we deserve to have God with us and we do what we should do.
The same thing applies to I as well.
Say that again, Michael. The same thing applies
to I as well, because in I it was a mitzvah, but the Jews one Jew didn't behave himself, so they lost out. Even though therefore it's not black and white.
Yeah, fair comment as well. That's another good example. So it's not, verse 1 is not a given. There has to be there is a caveat to verse 1 that God is with us, and we will see in a minute about being afraid. We'll come back to that in a minute. Yes, Julia.
I was going to say, well, actually, I forgot what I was going to say. It specifically says when you go out to war, which means that you are probably attacking rather than defending. And then it's against your enemies. So that if you were going to be on an optional war and to just for taking land, that might not be against your enemies, or maybe they would be defined as enemies, but they're not attacking us. And I was wondering whether Amalek were actually more numerous than us, because you said it's a given that they always are, but that's because lots of them usually get together. But were Amalek more numerous than us?
Well, in the war against Amalek, they attacked us. They attacked the weak and stragglers. So they were certainly, if not more numerous, they were certainly more stronger. Because the people they attacked, by definition, were the Hanecheshalim, the weak people. Probably were more numerous. I don't know, actually. Well, listen, we've got problems with numbers in the Torah anyway, haven't we? So I'm not convinced at all about those numbers in the Torah, as you know. So we'll perhaps leave numbers aside for the moment, otherwise we'll get sidetracked into that.
But looking at the words, it's quite it's not 100% clear. It's caged, the language. It's not definite. It doesn't say every time you are at war, this is what happens.
This is interesting because what Julia is doing now, Julia is being a latter-day Tanna from the Gemarah and is taking apart the psukim and looking at them in a very Gemarah-like way, and that's lovely. Julia is saying, well, just wait a minute. What does this really mean when you go out to war against your enemies? Implication, if you go out to war against somebody who's not your enemies, I might not be with you. So I think that you could make a good argument out to say that this was a milchemet, talking about milchemet mitzvah. Okay, I think I agree with that.
Can I put in my 2 bits worth?
Yeah.
Why would you go to war with somebody who's not your enemy? And also, what seems to be a little bit relevant in my head is that Abraham was punished for making a deal with a neighboring country, with Abimelech. And we are told somewhere else in the Torah that we're not allowed to make deals without peace agreements or deals with our neighbors. So you don't seem to have a middle ground. Either you're living peaceably or you go to war. And in English, the expression of going to war, even if it's a defensive war, is to go out to war. It's like you go, even after October 7th, yeah, we were attacked, and then we went out to war.
Okay. I agree. I agree. The expression "ki tetzei milchama" doesn't imply going out of your borders. I agree with that. However, you are right about. I'll come to you in a sec, Sharon. You are right about making peace treaties, and I'm going to come to that in a minute. Perhaps I'll come to it right now and then come back to it. Have a look on the screen now. There is a pasuk somewhere. Here we go. There we go. Verse 10. Have a look at that. When you approach a city to wage war against it, you shall propose peace to it. And it will be, if it responds to you with peace, and it opens up to you, then it will be that all of the people found therein shall become tributary to you, and they shall serve you. So there is a halacha here, and we're going to come back to this later on, that says that before you go and attack a city, you have to try and make peace with it. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to give in to it. On quite the contrary, making peace with it means that you rule it, because it shall become tributary to you and they shall serve you. So then, if it doesn't make peace with you and it wages war against you, you shall besiege it. And then you go into war.
Joshua was also told that.
Just one
Joshua,
sec. Just one sec. Jump to verse 15. Thus you shall do to all the cities that are very far from you, which are not of the cities of these nations. So the prohibition on making a peace treaty referred only to those nations who were in Israel, in the land of Israel, at the time of the conquest of Joshua. And that is why what Hannah was referring to just there when I cut her off was the Gibeonites, the Givonim, who pretended to have come from very far away to make a peace treaty. You remember, they got dressed up in old clothes and they brought old moldy bread and old water skins to make it look like they'd come a long way. Why? Because had Joshua known that they were from round the corner, which is what they were, he would not have been allowed to make a peace treaty with them. So there is that. Yes, Sharon, you wanted to say something. Well, you're muted right now.
Yes, the only thing I was going to add is, remember, there are countries that make war for Lebensraum against peaceful countries next to them that
Correct.
are not their enemies.
Correct. That answers the point about enemies. The fact is that when they do that, that is exactly, that is Rashi's view, by the way, Sharon, that is Rashi's view of what a Milchemet Reshut is, a war to make Lebensraum. Lebensraum means to make free space, literally, Lebensraum, free space around you. If they're not your enemies beforehand, by the time you've gone in there to their country and made Lebensraum, they certainly are your enemies. But granted, they weren't to start with. And that is the classical description of what is a Milchemet Reshut, an optional war. So
therefore, look, if you're saying it's an optional war, so therefore, in the Bible it says we can have from the Euphrates to the Mediterranean. So therefore, if Israel attacks Jordan or Syria or any of these countries, it becomes a mitzvah war rather than an optional war.
According to the strict interpretation of the Milchemet Mitzvah, yes. There is a different opinion that says only the first conquest of Joshua was Milchemet Mitzvah, but generally speaking, it is accepted that any war which is to either conquer or to protect the biblical land of Israel, yes, falls into that category of Milchemet Mitzvah, which by the same token means, and we mentioned this last time, we mentioned that Eilat is not in the biblical land of Israel, and therefore it could be argued that a war to protect Eilat, or not to protect Eilat, because then you're protecting Jewish people, but to conquer Eilat in the first place would not be a Milchemet Mitzvah because it's not in the borders. I think David wanted to say something. Yes, David?
Yeah, very interesting sforno on chapter 20, verse 1. The very fact that Torah uses kitate say, according to the sforno, this is an indication that it is in chutz la'aretz, therefore it's milchemet reshut, and all of the exemptions that are discussed in this chapter only apply to a milchemet reshut and not to a milchemet chovah. Similarly, in the next parsha, Kitate say, the first few verses there that talk about female captives, etc., also only apply to Milchemet Reshut because of the same terminology being used. Kitate says it's outside of Eretz Yisrael, and I believe that's the pshat.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're going to come to that. We're going to read the next load of psukim here after verse 1 here. And the halacha, I think, is that a Milchemet Reshut, these exemptions apply only to a Milchemet Reshut. And I will show you, as I promised you last time, we will go to a different Gemarah, to Sota, where it talks about the opposite situation. So Kitate say, when you go out, that was one of Julia's points, when you go out to war. But I think that there is a position to say what Hannah said, or somebody said anyway, that when you go out to war, that's an expression, and we see it. We say it in the Tehillim that we say in the morning, don't we? Hashem Yishmor Tzeitcha Uvoecha. Your goings out and your comings in. We've said that a few times. That means war. Somebody had their hand up there, and I can't remember who it was. Hannah, it was Hannah, I think. Yes, Hannah.
Unmute. Yeah, I've forgotten. I'm not a good student. David, when David went after the people who after Ziklag, when he came back and the camp had been destroyed and he went out to war against the people, I can't remember what he did to the people, or when he got there and he fought them. Did he kill them all, or did he just take his possessions back?
Well, first of all, that wasn't a milchemet reshut, because that was a war to only, I should say only in inverted commas, to redeem his captives. That was not a war of expansion. He didn't go into Ziklag to get Lebensraum. He went into Ziklag to get his wife and his family back, who'd been held hostage. So that was a milchemet mitzvah, because you have a mitzvah of pidyon shvuyim. You have a mitzvah of redeeming the captives. And of course, that applies to today as well, and we'll come to it. But no, he didn't kill everybody. He did take the spoils, though, and he brought them back into the camp and shared them out.
And it was also in the area of Israel. It was also in the area of Israel. It wasn't outside of Israel.
Ziklag, I'm not sure how far down Ziklag was, but I think you're probably right. You're probably right, yeah. Okay, let's go on, because it becomes interesting now. Remember, we're on verse 2. Can you still see the screen, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so we're on verse 2 now. So the first verse says, don't be frightened. And then it goes on to say, and it will be when you approach the battle that the Kohen shall come near and speak to the people. Which Kohen? Well, I think we've said this before. There was a special Kohen, a Kohen whose only job was to do this speech. He was known as the Kohen HaMashuach, which means anointed, the anointed Kohen. He was anointed to do this job. That is his whole job in life, was to give this speech. Verse 3, and he shall say to them, Hear, O Israel. Let's stop there. Shema Yisrael. What does that remind you of?
Shema Yisrael.
Yeah. So in other words, this is a very powerful start to the speech, right? Because the first thing you hear when somebody's giving you a speech and you hear Shema Yisrael, you're going to take notice. This is something very powerful coming up. Today you are approaching the battle against your enemies. Let your hearts not be faint. You shall not be afraid. You shall not be alarmed, and you shall not be terrified because of them. For the Lord your God is the one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies, to save you. Where have you heard that before? Maybe if I say it in Hebrew, you'll recognize it. Ki Adonai Elohechem ha'olech imachem lilachem lachem im oivechem.
And the prayer for the soldiers.
V'nomar. Amen. Yes, it's right at the end of the Tefillah L'Chayalim, which we say every day. This is the pasuk that is quoted there. For Hashem, your God, is the one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies, to save you. So again, the Kohen, first of all, says, don't be afraid. Hashem is with you. And then he says, okay, what about the next thing? And the officers then, that's him, he's done. That's all the Kohen does. The next bit of the speech is by the officers. The officers shall speak to the people, saying, what man is there who has built a new house and who has not yet inaugurated it? Let him go and return to his house, lest he die in the war and another man inaugurate it. So if you built a new house in the last year and you haven't yet consecrated it, then you are exempt from fighting. Next, what about, and this one, is there a man who has betrothed a woman who has not yet taken her? So he's engaged to be married, but is not yet married. Let him go and return to his house, lest he die in the war and another man take her. So person who's engaged to be married and not yet married, exempt from fighting. Number 9. Oh no, we've not finished yet. Sorry, beg your pardon. Number 6. Number 6. Number 6. I missed one out. Sorry, I missed 6 out. What man is there who's planted a vineyard and has not yet redeemed it? Let him go and return his house, lest he die in the war. Another man redeemed it. So there's a person planted his vineyard, but not yet harvested its fruit. He also is exempt from war. Then the betrothed man. And finally, this is an interesting one. Listen to this. The officers shall continue to speak to the people and say, what man is there who is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go and return to his house, that he should not cause the heart of his brothers to melt as his heart. So if you're scared, you're exempt from fighting. But you've just been told by the Kohen not to be scared. So how does that work? What are you frightened of? You've just been told not to be frightened.
That's not necessarily effective.
Okay, so the question is, why is this person afraid? And it goes back to what Hannah said right at the beginning. Hannah said right at the beginning, when verse 1 over there said, don't worry, Hashem is with you. Hannah said, not necessarily. And we proved, didn't we, that we have to be deserving of Hashem being with us. Moshe had to have his hands up and all that stuff, right? So if a person believes that he is not worthy of Hashem's support, then he might be fearful and faint-hearted. And why might he think that he's not worthy of Hashem's support?
Because he's done things he shouldn't do.
Because he's done things he shouldn't do, yes. I mean, we've all done things we shouldn't do. Well, most of us anyway, have done things we shouldn't do. But a person who thinks that he has done such bad things that Hashem would not be protective of him is going to be fearful and faint-hearted. And look at why he is exempt. Different reason from the others. The other things that he's exempt for is because it would be inequitable if he were to die in the war and somebody else would take his vineyard, his house, or his wife. But if you're faint-hearted, the reason that you are exempt from fighting is to preserve the morale of the nation. Because the last thing you want when you're fighting is to have people who are faint-hearted and panicking, because it will cause the heart of your brothers to melt, as it is mentioned there. So if you are faint-hearted, you're sent away so as not to spoil the morale of the people. Yes, Hannah.
The reason for why he might be faint-hearted bothers me a little bit, because unfortunately, as we have seen in this war the last 15 months or so, sometimes it's the best and the brightest who don't come home. Not people that we would have ascribed having done negative things. And a person can be fearful because he doesn't know what's going to happen, and he's just really, really scared, regardless of whether he's done anything bad or not. So I wouldn't say that that a person who is fearful is necessarily somebody who thinks he's done things that are really bad. That's all.
Okay, that's
just
fair enough. That's fair enough. I've put the Rashi on the screen for you here. I don't know if you can see that. It might be a bit small. So I'll read it to you. Rashi says, he quotes Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, this verse is to be understood according to its apparent meaning, that he cannot stand in the closed ranks of battle and look upon a drawn sword. Okay, so Rabbi Akiva says, like you, Hannah, he's just scared. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, it means one who is afraid of his sins, that they will cause him to fall in war, and he is unworthy. And therefore the Torah gives him the excuse of attributing his return home because of a house, a vineyard, or of a wife to cover up for those who return because of their sins, so that people should not understand that they are sinners. Consequently, one who sees this person returning would say, perhaps he's built a house or planted a vineyard or betrothed a woman. Okay, Sota 44a. We're going to come to that Gemarah in a minute. So you've got a difference of opinion between Rabbi Akiva, who says like Hannah, and Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who says, like we said earlier, about the sins. So both valid opinions.
I just one more thing. I remember when I lived on kibbutz, we used to give blood, and we had somebody in our garin who, when he gave blood, fainted because he couldn't stand the sight of blood. And you can have people who are just scared for no good reason. This gentleman, young man, couldn't stand the sight of blood, regardless. Yeah, and I'm sure there's other people out there that are the same.
Yeah, well, that's what Rabbi Akiva says. Rabbi Akiva agrees with you.
Isn't the point that it's showing lack of trust in Hashem, that he's in control of the universe and that everything happens as what he wants to happen? So it's showing that your personal feelings are trumping your emunah.
I think that's very true, Avril, and that's why there's this juxtaposition, isn't it, of the Cohen giving his speech saying, "Don't be afraid," and then the pasuk straight away comes and says, "Well, despite that, there will be some people who are afraid." Lacking in emunah, as you say. It's a big ask. Not everybody has that emunah, but you are right, Avril, that does display a lack of emunah. Just to go back to your point, Hannah, about the scared of blood. When I was a medical student, in the very first year, there was a chap in my year when we had to practice taking blood out of each other, and at the sight of the first needle, he went down, cracked his head on the oxygen cylinder, ended up in A&E, and eventually left medical school because he realized it wasn't for him. And he became a rather famous music producer and did very well for himself. But there you go. Just an aside about that. Yeah, right. Let's carry on. So now then, we've got all these people who are exempt from war. Now, David has rather preempted my next question because he's given you the answer. And the question is, of course, what war are we talking about? Are we talking about a milchemet mitzvah, or are we talking about a milchemet reshut, or maybe both? And in order to know the answer to that, we have to go to a different Gemarah. Gemarah in Sota 44. There it is on the screen for you. And this is actually the Gemarah that Rashi has just quoted. There we go, right on the screen for you. The Gemarah asks, with regard to their understanding that the fearful and faint-hearted is referring to one harboring sins, what is the difference between the opinion of Rabbi Yossi and the opinion of Yossi Aglili? The practical difference is with regard to a sin which violates a prohibition by rabbinic law. Okay, there's two opinions. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says if you've done an aveira of a rabbinic law, you can go home. And Rabbi Yossi says no, only if you've violated a Torah law. Rabbi Akiva, earlier on, says neither. It just means he's frightened. Okay, so this Gemarah says, Bameh Dvarim Amurim. What are we talking about here? In which cases are all of these statements with regard to the various exemptions from war said? This is a very, very famous Gemarah. I'm going to do it in the Hebrew to start with. Says the Gemarah, B'milchamot harishut. These exemptions, made a new house, planted a vineyard, got engaged, scared. These exemptions are only with a milchemet reshut, an optional war. Aval b'milchamot mitzvah, with a mitzvah war, hakol yotzein. Everybody goes out. Now, let's just stop there. The fact that it says hakol yotzein rather mucks up the opinion of the one, whoever it was that said ki teitzei literally means going out of Rashut. I think David quoted the Sepharno. Don't know what the Sepharno is going to do with this Gemara, David, because he's using this word yotzein with milchemet mitzvah. And so it can't be that the pshat is because of the words ki teitzei. It must be for a different reason, logic reason, whatever. The psak is that it's true. These exemptions are only for a milchemet reshut. This is what the Gemara is saying. But if the Sepharno is learning it from the word ki teitzei and saying that it means that he's going out of Eretz Yisrael, then I think this Gemara is difficult for the Sepharno to explain. Okay, just as a by the by. Now, this is the important and the famous bit of this Gemara. Aval b'milchemet mitzvah, with a mitzvah war, hakol yotzin, everyone goes out. Afilu, even chatan mechedro v'chala mechupata. Even from a chatan who is in his room. What does it mean, mechedro? He goes out of his room. What does that mean?
The chuppah.
No, it doesn't mean the chuppah, because the chuppah is the kala. Okay, the kala mechupata.
Is it tish?
No.
Consummation.
Correct. Consummation. Chedro means his inner chamber. The chatan can be in the middle of consummating his marriage. If there is a call to a milchemet mitzvah, he has to stop.
Yichud.
Yeah, from yichud. He has to go out of the yichud room in mid-action, if you like, and go to the war. Okay? A kala in the middle of her chuppah, the height of her joy in the middle of her chuppah, she has to leave and go to war. Now that raises another question, doesn't it? That raises a question of women fighting in the army or going to the army. Now then, simple pshat here is very simple. Very simple. Which bits of the words hakol yotzein do people not understand? Everybody goes out to war. And then just in case you might think, well, everybody doesn't mean me, even if you are a chatan in midst of consummating your marriage, you are obliged to go to war, which means there is nobody who is exempt from going out to war.
So what's the Haredim's excuse?
Okay, well, okay, that's the elephant in the room, which we will discuss very shortly.
Can I ask something, please?
Yes, you can.
I can understand the first three, although I do have a question about the consecration of the house, which I'm hoping isn't ignorance. But is everybody meant to consecrate their own home, or is it just for a shul? I mean, when they talk about consecrating houses, is that normal that everybody? And anyway, did they actually live in houses? But nevertheless, my question at the moment is, I can understand the house, the vineyard, and the betrothal, but surely the point about a fearful person affecting the morale of the others is he should be exempt, because why it's going to put everybody at risk.
Okay, I think there's a lot of different questions in there, Julia. There's a chazal that says that a wise person answers the questions in the order that they were asked, but that presupposes a good memory, because I can't even remember them all now, because you asked about four different questions.
My first question was, is it normal to consecrate a house? Does everybody have to consecrate a house?
No one does not. It's not an obligation to consecrate a house, but it seems that was what people did back in the day, that you consecrated the house as a house of God, right? Not necessarily as a shul, right? But you built a house, and you said, you made that's the Chanukah Tabayit. We call in English we used to call them a housewarming.
You haven't yet put your mezuzahs up.
Oh, that's good.
Okay, so when you put your mezuzahs up I suppose that's when you do your Chanukah Tabayit. Your Chanukah Tabayit is to consecrate the house to the glory of God. Okay, putting the mezuzah up is a very good time to have, I suppose, have done that. When do you have to put a mezuzah up, by the way?
Within 30 days, is it?
Interesting. If you are in Chutz La'aretz, it is within 30 days. There is an opinion that in Israel, you have to put it up straight away. The idea being that until you have been in your house for 30 days in Chutz La'aretz, it is not clear that you're staying, because everybody in Chutz La'aretz is a temporary resident, and you're really only staying there until you get an opportunity to go and live in the Holy Land. Whereas when you're already here in the Holy Land, you don't need that 30-day period to demonstrate that you're staying and that you are actually obliged to put a mezuzah up straight away. It's an interesting little halacha that not a lot of people know. So yeah, I think that's the Chanukah Tabayit. It means that you built the house, and it means you've not yet gone to live in it. Nobody would dream of going to live in a house until they've done a Chanukah Tabayit and put up a mezuzah kind of thing. Okay, that was the first question. And the second question?
Well, my second question is, I can understand the first three exemptions applying, but not the fourth one. Okay,
so that's a very good question. You don't want rubbish morale in a Milchemet Mitzvah either. And I think the answer has to be that the requirement to fight overrides that. Whereas with a Milchemet Reshut, you can afford that not everybody goes into war. With a Milchemet Mitzvah, you're fighting for your life. And therefore, everybody's scared. You're fighting for your life in the Milchemet Mitzvah, and every pair of hands is necessary. Avril Links needs to be let back in. She must have got chucked out for some reason. Everybody is required to put in a shift. And whilst you're right, you don't want people who are going to spoil spoil the morale. There are ways in which you can use the manpower in a way which their fearfulness will not spoil the morale. So yes, you don't want to put them on the front line, maybe, but there are other things they can do, which brings us to the Kala Meichul Patah. The simple, straightforward understanding of this Gemara is that everybody, man and woman, have to go to war for a Milchemet Mitzvah. That of course flies in the face of the Haredi experience today, where the women don't go out to war and neither do the men. And so how are we going to explain that? Michael Kraus just asked. So let's have an attempt at explaining it with a caveat, and that is that I do not believe what I'm about to say. Okay, I am presenting the position as put forward by the Haredim. Please do not consider that this is my opinion. It is not.
Can I make a comment?
You can.
I'm getting very sensitive about this business with Haredim.
Okay.
On the other side to you, because I mix in the Haredi community, and I am very well aware of many Haredim who've been on the front lines, who are on the front lines, who've participated fully in this current war. And okay. I think that knocking the Haredim is very easy because they're an identifiable group. Nobody talks about approximately, according to the army, an equal number of secular young men who refuse to go into the army for various reasons, like they wet their beds at the age of 18. So what we can talk about people who are, I don't know, or find another word for them, but to pick out one community which is easily identifiable, and it is no longer true, because there are, pity I didn't send it, a whole dud of Haredi fighting soldiers that's just gone out to war. So
Okay.
I'm
Let me
a little bit sensitive on the other side of the question.
Okay. Let me say right from the start that not only do I exclude from my comments the Haredi soldiers, on the contrary, I have even more respect for them because they are flying in the face of what their leaders tell them, and they are to be praised enormously. So without doubt, I am talking not about the Haredi soldiers who go out to war. They are to be praised enormously. But what you say is just not true, Hannah, because the numbers of Haredi soldiers versus the number of Haredi refusers, or those who are exempt according to the current law, they're not refusers yet, but those who by shitta, by philosophy will not go out to war. The number who go to war versus those who don't is minute. So, and the reason
that wasn't my comparison.
Let me finish. Since we've got onto this subject, let me finish. The point about singling out the Haredim is that they single themselves out, and therefore, if they single themselves out, then their views have to be examined. And the answer to what they say, not going out to these wars, is that their learning of the Torah is equivalent of fighting on the front line. And that is their view. As I said at the beginning, my view is that I don't accept that. I believe that this Gemarah is very clear that everybody has to go out to fight when there is a need for everybody to fight in a milchemet mitzvah. Their philosophy is that the learning of Torah is equal or greater than the fighting on the front. And you are entitled, if you want to believe that. That is not my view. And nor do I believe that they believe it either in great numbers, because if they did, they would take their learning and go down to the front line and not have bein hazmanim and do all of those things, but they don't. Anyway, so that's their
Just one
Not
correction.
only your view, Johnny.
Two corrections where you misunderstood what I said. I didn't compare Haredi soldiers with Haredi non-soldiers. I compared Haredi non-soldiers with the numbers of secular non-soldiers, people from Ramat Hod HaSharon and places like that, who don't go into the army because they don't want to. They just don't feel like it. That's number one. And number two is, there are many Haredim who also say, those who actually literally sit all day and learn, fine, they should learn. But there are thousands who don't. And
Agreed.
Those thousands should be conscripted. Yeah,
Agreed.
there are many are only asking for the small nucleus of Haredim who actually do sit and learn all day. That's all.
That isn't the mainstream view, as you well know. The leaders of the Haredi world have made it very clear that they should go to prison rather than lehitgayis. And of course, it all comes from the leaders. So there may well be one or
We'll
two
leave it at that.
into that category, Hannah. But the vast majority of the Rabbanim and the Roshei Yeshiva do not believe that. David, you wanted to add something?
No, just to add that your view is supported by the Rambam. So
Okay.
there are no exemptions for milchemet mitzvah.
So that's why the concept of milchemet mitzvah and milchemet reshut is very important, because if this is a milchemet reshut, if a war is a milchemet reshut, then there are all sorts of exemptions, including if you're scared. So that it becomes very important to discuss what is a milchemet reshut and what is a milchemet mitzvah. So the different opinions about this are that the two extremes are very clear. The wars that Joshua engaged in Kibush Haaretz, when he first crossed over the Jordan, everybody agrees that's Milchemet Mitzvah. The wars that David conducted outside of the land of Israel, everybody agrees that those are Milchemet Reshut. Where there isn't agreement amongst the poskim, I'm not talking about today's poskim, I'm talking about the previous generations, Rambam, other Rishonim and Achronim, is what about wars which are to defend what you already have, or preemptive wars to prevent an attack in the future? The example being the example par excellence being the 6-Day War, where we attacked first.
It's what Israel is doing with Syria now.
Yes, you could argue that, except that those areas of Syria are actually in the borders of Eretz Yisrael, so it's a bit more complicated.
Okay.
Whereas the 6-Day War, where we attacked Egypt right at the beginning and we destroyed their air force on the ground, that was definitely a preemptive strike outside of the biblical land of Israel. So we'll use the two examples of the 6-Day War, which was a preemptive strike. We attacked first, and it was outside Eretz Yisrael. There are those who say that that is a Milchemet Reshut, and it's not a Milchemet Mitzvah. And there are those that say, no, if that is a Milchemet Mitzvah, because had you not done so, we were surrounded by all these different nations at that time ready to attack us. And that threat of attack was imminent. So there are poskim that make a difference. They make a distinction between the preemptive strike because there is a very imminent threat and a preemptive strike, let's say Syria, right? There's no danger right this minute that Syria is going to attack us because they're in disarray. Whereas at the beginning of the 6-Day War, there was an imminent danger. I'll come to you in a sec, Sharon. Let me just finish this little thought process. So you can see the difference. There's some opinions are that a Milchemet Mitzvah includes a 6-Day War situation where a threat is imminent, but would not include a Syria situation today where the threat, if there is a threat, is not imminent. It's not immediate. Whereas others would say any threat in the future, you can do a preemptive strike to prevent that. If this is not, and those opinions would say the only definition of Milchemet Reshut is, as Sharon said, the war to gain Lebensraum, to just expand your empire, not as a defensive mechanism. It's interesting and not stressed enough, in my view, that our army is not called the Army of Israel. What's it called?
Israel
The Defense Forces.
Israel Defense Forces. We're only interested in defending ourselves. That, I think, is a very important point. Yes, Sharon.
And Johnny, that's what I wanted to address two things. One is a preemptive strike is still a defensive strike in the case when you know that your enemies are preparing to attack you. So in some sense, a Milchemet Mitzvah seems to me to have to do with anything having to do with defending oneself, with reasonable checks and balances to guard how broadly you expand that. Secondly, I take exception to what I think you said, but I'd like to ask you to clarify so that you can. When you talked about Syria being within the expanded biblical boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, which, as you and I all know, that there are 10 different boundaries from what Abraham could see standing on a little knob of a hill to the whole thing from Iraq to Greece almost. I have a really hard time talking about Milchemet Mitzvah and mixing up the concept from the time of the Gemarah, or the time of the writing of or the canonization of the Chumash, with the political boundaries the Jewish people have accepted upon themselves in this in the last century. Would you please, when you say Syria is within the greater land of Israel, I have a really hard time mixing that in with this conversation. Would you please make a distinction so that I'm not upset?
Yes, absolutely. What I meant to say, and I thought was understood, was that according to some opinions, the biblical borders of Israel goes right up to Damascus and beyond to the Euphrates River. But as we
just
know,
what we need.
Yeah, exactly. As we know, those who believe that that is the definition of the biblical borders of Israel have to deal with the fact that never in history have we ever occupied the entire biblical land of Israel according to that opinion. So it's rather difficult to accept that those are the biblical borders of Israel, if even at the time of the conquest by Joshua, where we were, as it were, on best terms with God, and one would have expected to have got what we were getting in full, we never got anywhere near that. So whilst there is that opinion, and there is support for that opinion in the in various psukim, as you quite rightly point out, there are a whole number of different versions of where the biblical land of Israel lies, and most of them don't include Damascus. So yeah, when I said that, I was talking about according to those who hold of that. The practical point of view is about the political situation. We have what we have on a political basis right now. Those of people who are of the sort of more mystical bent, if you like, would say that we are where we are because we have not yet reached the time of Mashiach. And when the time of Mashiach is, and when Mashiach comes, then we will have the full biblical land of Israel in all its glory, whatever that means, according to whatever opinion prevails.
And do we also go back to kings having harems and so forth?
Well, we may
I think we have to be careful.
The land? Can I make a comment on the land?
Yes, Hannah.
My comment on the land is that we have an indication of what we consider the land of Israel during Shemitah. Okay, Shemitah is bound to the biblical land of Israel, and fruit and vegetables that come either from the south of Israel, the Arava, or the Golan, which is Syria, or part of Syria, part of ours and part of Syria, but the part that's ours, are exempt from Shemitah, which means that they're not considered part of the historic core of the land of Israel, because otherwise you'd have Shemitah there too.
Okay.
I can't agree with that, because basically weren't the tribe of Dan up in the Golan and towards Damascus as well? Wasn't that the area of land?
No. Dan was where Tel Aviv is.
Yeah, but then
I think
the tribe was moved up north.
Reuven and Chatzi Menashe.
No. Later on, if you look at the biblical maps, you'll see that I'm pretty sure it's the tribe of Dan was
they were in
up
two
in Golan
places
and towards Damascus.
Dan was in two places, and they were split far apart.
I'm trying to find on my desktop, because I saved it, Johnny Halpin's favorite map, and I can't just find it. Give me a second to find it, and I'll put it on the screen. Whilst I'm looking for it, Hannah is right and wrong at the same time, and that is that yes, Shemitah is definitely bound to the land of Israel, but that doesn't really help us because those that believe that the biblical land of Israel goes all the way to all those places will hold up Shemitah there as well. They certainly would not.
But it's not the consensus of opinion.
No. You're right. It's not
The
consensus.
consensus of opinion is that the Golan and the Arava are not part of the core of biblical Israel.
That is the consensus, but there is an opinion, and it's not a tiny opinion, that the biblical land of Israel goes right up to the Euphrates, as described in the Torah itself, and that when Mashiach comes, that will be the borders. And those people that believe that will not eat Shemitah produce from those areas either. And I can't find this map for some reason. Oh, here we go. Yes, I have. I found it. 1 second. Let me put it. There we go. Let me put that on the screen for you. Give me a sec. Right. Let me just reshare that now. There we go. There we go. So there's Dan right at the top. There's Tyre. Okay. Dan used to be down here, of course, but then in the Sefer Shoftim, when we learned about Pesel Micha, they all went up to the north. And then after that, Dan's territory was in the north, north of Naphtali. Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh are on the other side of the Jordan River in what is now Jordan. The Golan is over here. I think you would agree, not in those tribal areas. So on this basis, on the basis of this map, it goes all the way up to well into Lebanon anyway. So yeah, those are all the different opinions. We're way over time. And you
haven't yet got to the situation with the women, John.
Yes.
Nor have you got to the situation with Rabbi Yehuda, because I tried very hard to come to terms with that printout that you sent us.
Yes, so Rabbi Yehuda has got a view altogether of a difference between, he splits up, doesn't he? Rabbi Yehuda splits up. I was just about to get to him actually when I got a bit sidetracked. So we said that everybody agrees that the conquest of the land by Joshua was a Milchemet Mitzvah. Everybody agrees that the expansive wars of David were Milchemet Reshut. Where the disagreement is in those middle ones, right? The preemptive wars, the defensive wars. Rabbi Yehuda makes a distinction between an obligatory war and a mitzvah war. And he splits it up into two. One is where you attack, and one is where you are attacked, where you are defending purely, and the other one is a preemptive attack. So if we were to take the 6-day war, Rabbi Yehuda would say that was a Milchemet Mitzvah and not a Milchemet Chovah. He brings in this extra category of an obligatory war, and he makes it very much more complicated. So we'll have to come back to that next week. Next week, we'll talk about women and our Gemarah in Sota, which I'll just take you back to there. I don't think you can see it now because I've stopped screen sharing. But remember, the Gemarah in Sota said that Akala goes out from her chuppah. And so we need to understand what is the role of women in the army, in warfare, then and today. Yes, Sharon, you're muted. Bless you.
I just want to wish everyone a joyful and a meaningful Pesach. We're going to be in the United States for the following month, and I will be following on recording. And but wishing you all well and enjoying hearing all your voices and your wisdom.
Thank you. We shall miss your wisdom.
Thank you.
Come back safely and come back safely and soon.